would you mind putting in our day 2 video? Y'all don't have to get quiet yet or anything. They'll hopefully give us a little moment. Sound. Super, second day, and now we're into our third. We made it. We're in the home stretch. We have some really important things happening today, and we're starting it right off. First thing in the morning, we have a very special announcement. I'm going to turn it over to our friend and federal partner, Melanie O'Brien from the National NAGPRA program.
Good morning, everyone. All right, let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Much better, much better. It is early. It is 8:54. Before I get into my announcement, I want to just take another opportunity to thank the Association on American Indian Affairs for hosting this amazing conference. As you all know, this is the 8th annual repatriation conference. I was in attendance at the first repatriation conference. I'm not sure if it was called the annual conference. It was just the first. And I wanted to especially thank the board of the association for continuing to support this conference and this work of the Association on American Indian Affairs. There's no way that my small office would have the capacity to have a conference of this size or this breadth. And so I really appreciate that we have a partner like the association to do this important work. I especially want to thank Colleen and Cece and of course Shannon for their personal dedicated effort tireless effort at every step along this process. So thank you, three. So you may or may not know that every morning at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Time, the Federal Register publishes its day. And this morning, I'm pleased to tell you that the Federal Register has published a proposed rule for revisions to the NAGPRA regulations. If you go to the federalregister.gov and today it's on public inspection, which it's the one proposed rule. And you click there and you'll see the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act as a proposed rule. It will be published officially next Tuesday, October 18th. But starting today, you can download a copy that looks like this, which is not the official publication. Apparently I put too many tables in and they're gonna take some time to format before they can publish it in the Federal Register 3-column format. But here it is in all of its 201 pages. Yeah, it's quite a thing. But it's honestly a really significant publication from my perspective, at least. And I know it's just the first step in the process. We have a long way to go before we actually have a change to the way that NAGPRA is done. But this is the very first step, at least in this effort to improve how we all do our work and ultimately to ensure that more ancestors can come home. So in the next 3 minutes, the department will be issuing a press release related to this as well. This will be followed, of course, by tribal consultation, as well as meetings of the NAGPRA Review Committee to discuss the proposed rule. And we will also be having public listening sessions as well. So there'll be ample opportunity for you to present oral comments. And then, of course, anyone can submit written comments on the proposed rule, which we will consider every comment that we receive. The comment deadline is 90 days. So 90 days after October 18th, which I'm going to let the Federal Register calculate because there's too many holidays in between now and then. But 90 days from October 18th will be the deadline for comments on the proposed rule. I'm going to be here all day today. If you have questions or if you can't find it on your own phone, let me know and I can help you. We're going to do as much as we can to provide tools and resources for those of you that are working in this area and are trying to digest 201 pages. We've already developed a couple of side-by-side comparisons of the existing regulations and the proposed. I have created some red line copies, which aren't very helpful, but they exist. So that might also help you see where the changes have occurred. So all of that will be on our website eventually, as soon as I get around to making it. But definitely by next Tuesday, we'll have all those resources out and available through the National Park Service NAGPRA website. So that's my announcement.
Thank you. We're so grateful to the National NAGPRA program for always attending and participating very strongly in our conference, and happy to hear this announcement. I think all of our prayers are working. And a new time is coming where more of our ancestors are going to come home. Thank you, Melanie, for that. You can count on the Association on American Indian Affairs to go over each word and comma and semicolon, and letting you know what we think, and inviting discussion and questions outside of those federal rooms, outside of the federal listening sessions and tribal consultation, so that we can talk and work through any issues and provide comments that are in line with your work that you do on the ground. So I'm really looking forward to working with you together on some written comments and for a better future under NAGPRA, as much as we can have a better future under federal law. I realized what I said after I said it. If we could put up my desktop on the board, I just wanted to remind everyone one more time, we want to have your museums and cultural centers participate in our Tribal Museums Day, and it's really easy to participate. You met Shannon Martin. Shannon Martin is leading and helping us with our inaugural first annual Tribal Museums Day on December 3rd. And she knows how your tribal museum and cultural center can sign up to be a participant. And you don't have to do much to be a participant, except make sure the museum is open on December 3rd. You have opportunities to provide free admission, and we will be providing marketing and other assets to help you promote your museum and Tribal Museums Day in general. You can provide special incentives to get people to come to your gift shop to buy those tribal citizen-made items and indigenous-made items from your gift shop to promote tourism, entrepreneurship in your lands, and those small business owners making wonderful things, and really helping to educate the public more broadly about the importance of tribal museums and the diversity of our cultures. So please let us know. You can also go to our website at indian-affairs.org, Tribal Museums Day, and you will see that there is information there where you can learn more if you're a tribal museum, how to contact us, and how the public can be engaged. Let me give you a few logistics, and then I'm going to ask Colleen Medicine to come up to introduce our keynote speaker, who everyone's waiting for. As you know, this is the last day for raffle tickets. The last day we'll be bugging you for those fundraising dollars that helps our work at the Association on American Indian Affairs. So we appreciate every single dollar bill you have put into that pot, and we'll use it in a good way. And Frank's in charge if I do anything wrong, right? Where's Frank? There he is right there. So if you don't think we're doing a good job, be sure you let Frank know so that he can lay the whip down on me, okay? Let's see. Raffle tickets at lunch, we'll have the raffle. Please check out our vendors if you haven't yet. If you are a volunteer, can we put our hands together for all of our volunteers that have been helping? Thank you so much. And if you're a volunteer and you did not get a conference shirt, please see Colleen. She has a list that you can fill out so we can make sure that we recognize you and the work that you helped us with during the conference. I want to thank again our amazing host, the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians. And the Clarences for our opening sunrise ceremony every day up here at 6:30 in the morning. Thank you. And they've been here with us all day, all night. Our sponsors, of course, the Chickasaw Nation of Oklahoma, Woot, the Robert S. Peabody Institute of Archaeology, Bernstein and Associates, Seneca Nation Gaming Corporation, the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, who have promised us they're going to get into compliance. All right. I can't support y'all. You can't be a sponsor of the association's conference unless you comply with NAGPRA. So we want to see you complying with NAGPRA. Cultural heritage partners, Cogstone Resource Management, the Native American Rights Fund, and Homelight. Our media partners have been Native News Online and the wonderful representative who's here with us, Jenna Kuntz, and Koanik Broadcasting Media, who's also supporting us and supporting this conference and supporting Tribal Museums Day. Thank all of you for your wonderful presence and strength that you've brought into this room. Please get plenty to eat. And without further ado, do we use that word anymore? Ado, like where did ado? Just doesn't sound right on a Thursday morning. Get your butt up here, Colleen. That sounds better, right? Thank y'all. Sorry, I forgot to get there.
I'm a little shorter than Shannon. Bonjour, Minakaje Boggett. That simply means it is a good day. I'm sure you all know me by now. I'm Colleen Medicine, and I have an incredible honor this morning to introduce our final keynote speaker. Angeline Boulley is a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians and a storyteller who writes about her Ojibwe community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, about 6 hours north of here. Angeline lives in Southwest Michigan, but her home will always be on Zispaqua Minising in Anishinaabe, and that means Sugar Island. Firekeeper's Daughter is her debut novel and was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller. It also won the Walter Dean Myers Award for Outstanding Children's Literature in the teen category in 2022. But I also have a personal story about Angeline. When I was fresh out of my undergrad and I was eager to come home to my community and work, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I kept saying to everyone when they would ask, I just want to work for my people. I just want to work for my people. And I was feeling pretty good. I had my fresh bachelor's degree. And if any of you have gone through that process, you know how you feel on top of the world. And then the world just like shuts you down. So I was applying for jobs, and I wasn't getting any. And I was thinking, like, I'm so qualified for these jobs. What's happening? Like, I didn't even get an interview for an administrative assistant job. And so I was feeling pretty bummed out, and I had one final interview, and it happened to be with Angeline. And we sat and talked in this interview like we were friends from way back. And ultimately, Angeline ended up hiring me. So she was my very first boss out of my undergrad. And the reason that I'm telling you this story is because Angeline's been a really important part of my life, and someone that I looked up to at that time, and someone that I still continue to look up to. Thank you for being so fierce and for leading the way and letting our children finally get a book in their hands that represents them. Yeah. Just shuffle my paperwork here. So Angeline's talk today is called Representation Matters, telling our stories. Stories and storytelling are the foundation of how traditions, language, and culture were passed from generation to generation, and still how we pass on information, traditions, and language in our communities today. Indigenous people have a long history of telling stories through oral tradition, that included oral storytelling, singing, and poetry. Also writing on scriptures and things like that on birch bark scrolls. Children and youth literature is a fraught territory for Indigenous peoples, and Native representation supports healthy Native nations. Let us all be a positive influence as we mentor the next generation. And I do say the word adieu. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up my friend, someone I look up to, and I think I speak for a lot of our communities when I say we're so proud of you. Welcome, Angeline Boulley.
Uju, Anin, Angeline Boulley, Misko Makokwe Nedishnakas, Makwadodam, Zispakwa, Menacing, and Donjaba. Chimagwech. Hello, everyone. I'm Angeline Boulley, Bear Clan, and I'm from Sugar Island. So you might be wondering why I'm talking with you today. And I grew up here in New Buffalo. So my father is from Sugar Island, and in the Navy, he met my mom in Chicago and they settled here in New Buffalo. And I couldn't wait to leave. When I graduated high school, I thought, I will never see you people again. I am never coming back here except just to visit parents. And in a very full circle moment during COVID, I came for a visit and I checked on my parents and and I could tell that it would be good if I moved back and kept an eye on them and spent more time with them. So I'm very thankful and I love being here. So introducing me in Ojibwemoan, it connects me to my community and celebrates that our Ojibwe language and cultural teachings are still here because of stories. Storytelling is how we share what it means to be Anishinaabe and what it means to be human. We're gathered in this here today, honoring stories. I was raised on stories. I'm going to do a few slides here. I was raised on stories. My father is a firekeeper, so I really am a firekeeper's daughter. He tells stories while tending to ceremonial fires at our tribe's fasting camp and other communities events also. Firekeepers ensure that protocols are followed because ceremonial fires are not like ordinary campfires. You don't roast hot dogs or talk politics or even gossip around a ceremonial fire. Only good thoughts and words to feed that special healing fire. I firmly believe that stories are good medicine. Whether we see ourselves on the page or experience lives quite different from our own, we connect to something larger than ourselves, our humanity through story. Oh, I think I pushed a button. Let me get this. I might need a little bit of help with this. Yeah, okay. All right.
Let's get it on a slideshow for you. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Because it. All right, PDF, take my full screen mode.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So my book, Firekeeper's Daughter, begins with, I began as a secret and then a scandal. And the story behind my story is pretty interesting. So like I said, I grew up here in New Buffalo, and my mom didn't drive. And so every Saturday, my mom, it was like a mama duck and her ducklings. We would follow behind her single file, and she would make sure that she hit the post office and the bank before noon. And then we would go to the public library, and we could check out as many books as we wanted, as long as we were willing to carry them in our tote bag. And I remember, of course, reading all of the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys. I also read books about English royalty and architecture and roses. So I really do credit both of my parents for this love of reading, love of learning. So two things happened when I was a senior in high school here at New Buffalo High School. One was, it was the first time I ever read a book that featured a Native main character. It's a book called Stranger with My Face by Lois Duncan. And I love every book that Lois Duncan wrote, except for A Stranger with My Face. It wasn't until I read the book that I realized, wait, I haven't seen a story with a Native main character until now. And then when I finished the book, I felt less than good about it. And I didn't have the words to explain why. And now I know it's because the representation in that story, it was hokey. It relied on stereotypes, and it really provided inaccurate information. Books serve as windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors by which children can see themselves reflected on the page, or their experiences, or stories about people very different from themselves. So there's the Cooperative Children's Book Center, School of Education at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they've been keeping track of diversity in books for children and teens. And less than 1% of all books that are published in the US feature a Native main character. And when they first started keeping the data on this, it was about 9 times, more like 9 times out of 10, the author of a book about Native Americans was not Native. The second thing that happened to me my senior year of high school is that my good friend was looking out for me, and she told me about, oh yeah, that's me as a senior. I'm like, I wish I had that skin. I wish, yeah. Oh, I have so much advice to give young Angeline. But my friend told me about a new guy, a new boy that was in her classes, and she thought he might be my type. I kind of liked the beefy football player kind. Yeah, that didn't work out. And I was dateless and intrigued, so I asked about him. And a few weeks later, she said, I don't think he is your type because he doesn't play sports, and he only hangs out with the really hardcore partiers. And I was like, okay, as they say, that wasn't on brand for me. And so I never met him. A month before graduation, my friend told me, she's like, you're never going to believe it. That new guy, it turned out there was a huge drug bust in town. A lot of arrests were made. And it turned out that the new boy was actually an undercover police officer. And he actually showed up at a school assembly and said, you know, like who he was and what he had been doing. And this was, I'm dating myself, which are the only dates I get these days. Anyway, but it was right before the original 21 Jump Street. And so the idea that this young looking police officer could pose as a high school senior just, you know, blew me away. And I remembered thinking, what if we had met each other? What if we liked each other? What if there were sparks? What if he needed my help? And then just really the spark of an idea that has been with me for 37 years was, why would some undercover drug investigation need the help of an ordinary 18-year-old Ojibwe girl? Well, I ended up, I was the first person in my family to go away to college, and had a great time. And then I ended up working for the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe. And I worked in, I had students at West Intermediate. I had 44 7th and 8th grade students. And I still consider them my students, and so many of them have gone on to really wonderful things. So I worked for Saginaw Chippewa tribe. I worked for the Pokagon band as tribal education director. And then I worked for my own tribe for about 12 years as tribal education director. And then as the tribal administrator in charge of all of our membership services programs. And every now and then the idea for this story would pop back into my mind. And I started working out these puzzle pieces and thinking, what if it was a federal drug investigation on a reservation? What if the drug had a recipe that could be manipulated? And what if it had something added to it that had a cultural component? And what if that 18-year-old girl knew a lot about chemistry, but also knew about traditional medicine, knew her culture and language, and was connected to everybody and everything? She actually would be the ideal confidential informant for a story. Now, in my community, the FBI and BIA aren't necessarily the good guys. So I had to figure out how to create a compelling reason why this young woman would even entertain the notion of helping the federal government in this investigation. So I worked out these puzzle pieces, and I don't have a background in creative writing. Every job I've ever had, no matter what my title was, I also wrote grants. And I realized that every grant application, every proposal that I submitted, I was actually telling a story about my community and the issue that we wanted to address and why we picked that particular approach, how we would know that we were on track, and why we should be trusted with the funding. And I realized I was a storyteller. It's just that my form of storytelling was very different than any author I had ever heard about, but it didn't mean that my experience and training was any less valid. So I remember listening to an interview that Billy Joel did, and he talked about how he dreamt in music, and when he would wake up, he would rush to his piano and try to get down the music that he had heard in his sleep. And I remember talking to a friend of mine from Saginaw Chippewa tribe about it, and she said, I dream about jingle dress designs. And I thought, well, what do I dream about? And I dreamt about stories. And I kept coming back to this idea about this undercover investigation. So I rethought my experiences, realized that I was a storyteller. And something happened around 2009. I think I went through this midlife crisis where I realized that there was probably more sand in the bottom of the hourglass than the top. And if I hadn't accomplished the dreams, the goals that I had always said I was going to do, what was I waiting for? So I decided to write the Indigenous Nancy Drew meets 21 Jump Street story that had been on my mind since I was 18. Any writer will tell you that writing is actually rewriting. And so for 10 years, I would write a draft of the story. And when I finished, I would set it aside, and then I would read it again with fresh eyes. And I would see what things I had done well, but I would also be brutally honest with myself about where I could improve. And for example, how to write dialogue. And so I would reread favorite books and see how those authors wrote dialogue. I would listen to the way that my sons talked with their friends and learn about how natural dialogue sounds. I kept doing this for 10 years. Along the way, I discovered the hero's journey. Now, this is an actual thing, but I remember when I first learned about it, I was talking to my kids, and I had one child who loved everything Harry Potter and one who loved everything Star Wars. And I remember saying, you realize those are the same story. It's the same story. And so we plotted out the ways that they're similar. This average person gets this call to adventure. Ironically, their uncle refuses the call for them, but then something happens and they step into this extraordinary world, guided by a wise mentor. They face a series of trials and tribulations. They gain allies and enemies, and they transform through this process. And then when they face the final test, the major villain, whether or not they're successful, they're forever changed. And when they return to the ordinary world, they're no longer the same person. They're all forever changed by the experiences that they had. And I thought about how we hear about the hero story. We see it in so many popular movies, books, television. And I thought, we Anishinaabe, we have our hero stories too. Nana Bojo and all these stories. And sometimes the lessons that he learns are at his own expense. Sometimes he's a goofball and things don't always work out for him, but there's always a lesson. So I had this eureka moment, and it was seeing the hero's journey depicted with these 4 quadrants and the major plot points sketched out like that. And then right afterwards, I saw the Ojibwe medicine wheel. This one is by Keweenaw Indian community. And for some reason, like sometimes I see the medicine wheel and it's shifted on the axis a little bit. And but seeing it with the 4 quadrants this way, right after I saw about the hero's journey, I thought, wait, I could overlay it and I could tell the hero's journey from an Indigenous young woman's perspective. And I could use the medicine wheel as this cultural framework for telling this story. When I had that moment, when I had that realization of how I could frame the story, I knew I would get a book deal, and I knew that my book would reach people. So my experience was the opposite of hurry up and wait. It was a very long time building up to the very first peak on a roller coaster. And you know how it takes so long and you hear that like clink, clink, clink before it takes off. That was my writing experience with Firekeeper's Daughter. 37 years in the making. But once I had finished a draft that I felt confident could get published, I had an agent within 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks of being on submission, there was a 12 bidder auction for the North American publishing rights for my book. And 2 weeks after the book auction, I sold the film rights to the Obamas for my book to be a series on Netflix. So thank you. Thanks. And yes, my book deal was a 7-figure deal. I received in excess of $1 million. And it was the largest advance paid that year. And I believe it's the largest advance paid to a debut author, a Native author. I was able to be on Good Morning America. Reese Witherspoon picked me for her young adult book club. So many incredible things have happened since the book came out. I also have 21 foreign rights deals where my book is being translated and published in many different countries. My book debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's won some pretty incredible awards. And the reason why these things are important is because, okay, mainstream publishing is overwhelmingly white and male. And there are people, mediocre people, who get multiple times at bat. But if you're from a marginalized community, an underrepresented community, you get one time at bat. And if you don't get on base, it's going to be a very long time before someone else from your community gets a deal like that. So I knew that there were high expectations for how my book would do, and that if it didn't perform, that it would harm, I felt, Native authors coming behind me. So it's been a whirlwind since my book published in March of 2021. And my book deal was for 2 books. And I remember thinking, you know, what next? Am I going to write Daunis 2.0, the next story? What am I going to do? And I thought, well, you know, if all I've got in me is one story, I'm okay with that. So I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I was out for a walk one Sunday, and all of a sudden this voice popped into my head, and she said, I stole everything they think I did, and even stuff they don't know about yet. And I thought, who is this? Who is this person? And so I ran into the nearest business, which was Cheese Teak in the Delray neighborhood of Alexandria. And I ran up to the bar and I said, I need a piece of paper and a pen and a Chardonnay. And I sat there for a couple of hours. And I wrote this stream of consciousness of this 16-year-old girl sitting in a police station waiting for her parents to come and get her. And I realized that my story for book 2 was going to be an Indigenous Lara Croft, where instead of raiding tombs, she's raiding museums to bring our ancestors and sacred items home. And that experience taught me that I had had too many experiences when I was writing Firekeeper's Daughter, where I wanted the story to go this way, but the characters wanted it to go this other way. And if you listen to your characters and just try, those were the scenes that really resonated and made the book. And so I learned to listen when a story was trying to come through me and not from me. And when I had the realization about what book 2 would be about, I realized that when I'm ready, the story will come to me. And that's powerful. And so I feel a responsibility to tell stories that reflect our truths, some unpleasant truths in our communities, but also the joyful parts, the humor, raunchy elders telling, and just the ways in which my community looks out for people, the ways in which women look out for other women. So my book has won some really great awards, and Warrior Girl Unearthed will be coming out in May of next year. And thank you. That scene that popped into my head, the 16-year-old girl who you've met in Firekeeper's Daughter, sitting in the police station. She's covered in blood, waiting for her parents to come get her. But instead, the person that bursts through the door is her auntie, Donis. And she runs up to her niece, Perry, puts her arms around her and is like, what in the hell is going on? And then whispers in her ear, don't tell them anything. And I'm excited for you to meet Warrior Girl in May. So my book has won these great awards, and my publisher tricked me. And when the announcement was going to get made, my editor and agent, my editor said that she needed to have a phone call with me, and she copied my agent on it, and my agent accepted the Zoom call. And I thought, that's odd, because usually my agent doesn't participate in editorial calls. And so I show up on the Zoom, and it's the screen was filled with probably 36 people, unfamiliar faces too. And it was, I thought that they were attorneys, and that maybe I had done something really bad in my first draft of Warrior Girl, and because I didn't recognize people on the call. And what it was they were the Prince Award Committee. And when I realized who they were, I thought, oh, my book must have been shortlisted. What an honor. And they told me that my book had won. And the Michael L. Prince Award is for outstanding young adult literature. And it's given by the American Library Association. And I started to cry. And I said, I know what this means. The next clear memory is of everybody logging off. And I stayed on the Zoom because I thought that my editor had, I thought we were going to talk about the notes that she had referenced when she set up the meeting. And then I realized, oh, that was just a ruse to get me here. So yes, I'm very gullible. It's only now that I can really articulate what I meant by I know what this means. In 2002, when the Children's Cooperative Book Center began keeping data about the number of books about Native Americans and by Native Americans for children and teens, there were about 64 books published that year about Indigenous people, but only 6 books were authored by an Indigenous person. Just 6 books, and that data was for the US and Canada. Flash forward 20 years later, in 2021, the number of books about Indigenous people increased from 64 books to 74, which is an increase of more than 15%. But the number of books by Indigenous authors went from 6 to 60, and that is a 900% increase. So people are recognizing that stories told from our lived experiences, we understand best how to portray the nuances in our community. I was one of those 60 authors. Representation in children's literature, it matters. It means choosing Indigenous stories authored by those more likely to know community nuances and when to draw the curtains to protect Indigenous knowledge. I had a mantra while I was writing Firekeeper's Daughter, that I write to preserve my culture and I edit to protect it. It's not to say that I or any Indigenous author won't misstep and falter. What it means is that someone writing from lived experience is more likely to tell a story that accurately and appropriately represents their culture. For example, I wrote about trauma, but I didn't write a tragedy. Telling a truthful story about my community meant sharing about the joy, connectedness, healing, and humor, as much as revealing unpleasant truths faced by a teen coming of age in a tribal community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I know what this means. To be an Indigenous author with a significant advance from a major publisher, and the self-induced anxiety that my book's performance might help or hinder other Indigenous authors' abilities to get book deals. To be a debut author at age 55, when the urgency of setting up an estate is like driving the Jeep in Jurassic Park and the T-Rex is the Grim Reaper, and I keep glancing at the rear view mirror that says, reminds me that objects are closer than they appear. To write a bilingual story without a glossary. I know what this means. When a teacher says that a reluctant reader finished my book before anyone else in the class. When someone who's non-native tells me how much Donna's story resonated with them. My book launched during COVID, and so any of my in-person events, everyone would be masked. And it happened more than once that an Indigenous woman would come up to me at an event, both of us masked, and our eyes carried the weight of our exchange as I asked her if I got it right, and she let me know that she felt seen. I'm so excited to be talking to you about Warrior Girl Unearthed. I hope that the books that I write deal with difficult topics in a way that teens feel seen in a story. So my first book dealt a lot about tribal enrollment and being biracial and feeling like perhaps you don't belong in either world. It's about identity, and that when we claim all of the facets of our identity, we come into our strength. It also told a story about grief, loss, and about justice, who gets it and who doesn't. I'm excited for Warrior Girl Unearthed to tell a story about ownership, of Indigenous bodies, past and present. My character, Perry, she starts out intending to celebrate her summer of slack, in which all she's going to do is go fishing every day. Her sister, her twin sister, meanwhile, has gotten an internship program through the tribe and is really excited about being an intern. Perry skipped her interviews for the program. She just didn't even bother showing up. But a mama bear in her path when she's driving, she wrecks the Jeep that her Aunt Donis gifted to them. And her Aunt Donis informs her that she's going to pay off the cost of the repairs by taking the very last internship opening at the tribal museum. And she's going to work for someone that's kind of regarded as an odd character. And Perry accompanies him, her supervisor, to a college museum. And that's where she learns about our ancestors being kept in cardboard boxes in archives. And that's where she meets the warrior girl. I'm so thankful to Shannon Martin, Colleen, and so many subject matter experts who have helped me, because I want to do right by this story. It's too important a topic. And what I want is to have the teens take up this very important charge of studying anthropology, archaeology, historic preservation, and be those warriors that we need going forward until every ancestor is brought home. So, stories are good medicine. And to paraphrase Granny June, one of the elders in my stories, stories are like Anishinaabe Quewag, Ojibwe women, strong like the tide, connected to forces too powerful to control. Weak people fear that strength and the healing power of our stories. Miigwech, it's been an honor to talk to you this morning. If there's any questions, I'm very happy to answer. I answer everything except what Jamie's real name is. Oh, and no, I haven't met the Obamas yet, but I'm very hopeful that I will when the series premieres. And the best question I got, I was talking with a high school, and they didn't vet the questions ahead of time. So this young man raised his hand and had a question, and he said, "Can you get me a role on the series?" And everyone was cheering him on in that. And I said, "Oh, what role do you think you should play?" And he goes, "I don't know. I didn't read the book." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Here's my business card. Read the book and get back with me and tell me what role you think you should play and what role you think you would be so not suited for." So I'm still waiting for him to respond back, but yeah. My hope is that the series does some location shoots in Michigan. When I wrote it, I pictured Shigala, the hockey gala taking place at Soaring Eagle Resort in Mount Pleasant. I don't see how you can tell a story that involves the Sugar Island Ferry without filming it on the Sugar Island Ferry. And so I'm really excited about that. And if they do location shoots, I'm gonna post like when they call for extras for the scenes, and so that all my friends from all the different tribes in Michigan can be extras in like some of the bigger scenes. And just a wild ride. It still seems unbelievable that this has happened. Any questions?
Yeah, hi, I loved your book. It's such an honor to hear from you and the story behind the story and your publishing journey. I was wondering, given that it's bilingual without a glossary, whether that was ever a conversation with the publisher that you had to have, or there was some negotiation around that?
Yes, great question. My publisher did want me to include a glossary, and I pushed back on it and said no, that publishing a glossary centers it in a non-native gaze, Jaganash gaze. And I wanted the story to be Indigenous, and that meant, the story is told from present tense, first person point of view. And I did that on purpose so that the reader is inside Donis's head. And even though the story takes place in 2004, it's happening as Donis relays it. And I did that to drive home the point that we're still here. And the way that Donis sees the world, Ojibwe language is a part of it. And I figured if I did a good enough job as an author, that readers would be able to figure out the meanings of words through context. And I'm very proud to have pushed back and not included a glossary. So, yeah.
Anine, I'm Marie. For people who don't know me, I'm also a citizen of Sioux tribe. And the number of conversations that first year after your book came out, where that was pretty much everything that everybody would talk about, and including like the appreciation of seeing language in it, like that fostered a lot of conversations. But yeah, growing up, there weren't really characters to look at. I was thinking about the 2 books I read growing up, and Native people were secondary characters to advance a storyline, and to be able to see ourselves as the main character. Kind of thinking back into that, millennials being that generation that hopefully we're the last ones who say, I didn't get to grow up with culture. So having, these characters is so, I'm trying not to cry, is so important. And just this kind of explosion of Native authors, being the manager of our Ojibwe Learning Center and Library, we have a list of Indigenous authors, and people always stop and stare at it. And you're one of those on that list, of course. But just, the difference in so many years. So I really appreciate, and so many people in our community just so appreciate, and I'm sure you've heard that time and time again, but miigwech for your work.
Oh, thank you. Miigwech. So when it came time for including the Ojibwe in the book, I had a decision whether or not I was going to follow the phonetic spelling, because that's how my dad, if he writes out any words, he does it phonetically. But I worked with Dr. Margaret Noden, and she really made the case for using the double vowel system, and that my book might be used as a supplemental text in Ojibwe language courses. using the double vowel system provides a standardized way of spelling and pronunciation. But my dad is still mad at me for not doing the phonetic spelling. But when he read the book, he said, "You told who we are and showed them." And he was really proud, really happy about that. So very glad that my dad, the firekeeper, got to read the book and see us, see our communities and our families and the love and all the wonderful things that help us survive. Clarence?
I'm listening to you speak, and you know, I really didn't meet you until this week, and you might have seen me from time to time. I think I've seen your father, me and Clarence White both have, a couple of years ago, attending the fire. I had no idea. And I thank you so much for giving me that book on CD, because that's the only way I can read, because I'm legally blind, visually impaired. But so I read the books in the morning when I'm eating my breakfast and having a cup of coffee and drinking my water. I haven't read the book, but I am so anxious to read your book. Even though you told me about how they said about the pasties or whatever, you know, and how they mispronounced them in there, you know. Yesterday, I was talking about how proud I am of our women in Anishinaabe and how strong they are, you know, in our community. And you're one of them. And I know there are so many out there of an Anishinaabe. I say Azung Anishinaabe, strong Native women that we have, and they always step up, and it just makes me so proud of our women in this book. And when you talked about you love Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys. When I was in high school, I loved Nancy Drew too. But I always used to hide me reading this book in a magazine, so nobody could see me reading about Nancy Drew. You know, people come up and I close my magazine real quick, you know, in the library, whatever, you know, and look around. Because you didn't want another guy to see you reading Nancy Drew. But one of the books I read in Nancy Drew, really, the Mystery of the Dancing Puppets. I loved that book. And I said, well, that's where she's getting some of her thing, you know, how to be a detective, you know. And so when you said the title of this book and what it represents, I said, oh my God, that's what we need for our children to hear. But I understand that these books aren't also for children, but they're for us elderly people, there's adults. And when you told that story about what this young lady's going to be doing, going into museums and stuff like that, and getting our remains back, or getting our, you know, the artifacts and all this stuff back. I remember back in the early 90s, and I am not going to mention this woman's name. Clarence White knows, we all know who this woman is and her husband. But one time I received a phone call, probably around about 92 or 93. And it was this young woman. And she goes, Clarence, she goes, I need help. I said, why? What do you need help for? She goes, I was at a museum up north there in Michigan, someplace. I couldn't remember where it was at. She says, and I was walking through there, and she says, and I noticed how they had Native things out there. She says, some of this stuff was real artifacts from our people. You know, this is before the NAGPRA law came into effect. She says, and I was up on this one, watching this thing out there. She says, and there was this guy who had this wampum belt. And she says, and I knew, and, you know, it was authentic. And she says, and I knew that, you know, the tribe that it belonged to. She says, so I looked around for any cameras, she said. She says, so then I said, I knew I shouldn't do this, but I took a chance. She says, and there was a rope going across there. She says, I snuck up under that rope real quick, went over on that thing, and took that wampum belt off, and I took it, and I ran out. She said, I put it in my bag. She goes, now what do I do? I says, apparently there's something there that says where that wampum belt came from and what band or what tribe or whatnot. She goes, yeah. I said, you need to get hold of that band or that tribe and you need to send it back to them. Find out who it is and where it comes from and give it back to that band. So as soon as you said that, the mind, boop, just this young lady did the same thing. Mm-hmm. And later on, maybe I can talk to her and I can tell you who she is. Maybe you can talk to her. Because I didn't think, she says, I didn't know I could do this. She said, but next time I knew I was on the other side of that rope, took that doggone wampum belt, put it in my bag, took off. She says, I don't know if I was seen. She says, if that nobody got a hold of me or cops didn't chase me down. So I say my goods to you for your teachings, because what you're doing in that book, you're giving teachings, not only to our little ones, but to our elders, the ones. Okay, and we get teachings from all over. I once heard this one elder a long time ago. His name was Dan Pine. He said, Clarence, he says, we know a lot of things, he said. He says, but we don't know it all. He says, we continue to learn, we continue to learn. He says, even when we leave this physical world and we go on that spiritual journey, because even in that spiritual journey, we are still learning. He says, so I know a lot of people that think they know everything. He says, but I am 95 years old and I don't know it all. So the things that you do in this book, in the books that you're going to write later on, I can hardly wait. Miigwech.
From back, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I gave Clarence a copy of the audiobook on CD. And the first time I heard it, we had worked so hard with Dr. Noden on making sure all the Ojibwe words were pronounced accurately that the narrator, Isabella, she mispronounced pasty as pasty, which is a completely different thing. And I was like, oh my God. So I called my agent and I told her this needs to get changed. And she said, Macmillan wants to do the right thing. The hard copy CDs are already being produced in China. We can't stop that train, but we can change it for any of the the digital audio. So every now and then, and she said, is it worth the expense for Macmillan to ship the recording equipment back to Isabella for 5 uses of the word? And I said, you don't understand. If I show my face north of the bridge and it doesn't get changed, like my new Indian nickname from my cousins will be Pasty for the rest of my life. Yes, so they did change it on all the digital copies of it, but every now and then someone will come up to me and say, did you know that that word is mispronounced? And yes, very, very aware of it.
Thank you, Angeline. I just wanted to share that folks on Zoom are giving you tons of emojis, tons of loves and thanks, and are so grateful for your presentation today and all the work that you're doing with Firekeeper's Daughter and your new book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whew. Thank you again, Angeline. I was sitting over there trying to be low-key, tearing up a couple of times, especially this picture, because wait, can't see it anymore. Sorry. Yeah, right here. That picture of Angeline and her dad, we call him Uncle Henry. And he's such an important part of our community. And when you were talking about how he was so proud of you, I started tearing up. But I've collected myself now. I wanted to also remind everybody that Angeline has graciously donated a couple copies of her book, Firekeeper's Daughter, and some coffee cups to the auction. So if you haven't read it yet and you want an opportunity to, please check out our raffle, get your tickets, and hopefully you can win. We do have a break at this time. It's a 15-minute break, and we'll come back for our next panel, Supporting Cultural Continuity Through Indigenous Collections Care. Thank you.